There we go. Awesome. All right. Amazing. So this morning, welcome, Frank. Welcome along for a little masterclass on cold email deliverability today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, looking forward to. And
Thanks, man.
have a bunch of stuff to share. And yeah, anybody feel free to ask me any questions along the way.
Awesome. Well, thank you, mate. So yeah, we're going to talk. So Frank, you're from SourceForge. You guys specialize in
Salesforce.
cold. Sorry,
Salesforce is not a company.
Salesforge. Sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry, man. It says it here in front of me. SourceForge. Maybe this should be a new company. I don't know. Salesforge. Beg your pardon. Salesforge.ai. Just to be really clear, mate. Um, So you guys specialize in cold email and automation and AI backing that up as well to make things really ultra personalized. And what we're going to talk about today, so you've got a little presentation for everybody just to run through some of the things that you need to do and think about like infrastructure, IP authentication, like warming up, which is one of the
Yeah.
essential things. Like we talk about warming up email. We also talk about warming up SIM cards. People need to equate the
Yep.
two together. And then, like, how do we do this? Like smart sending, sequence timing, throttling, how to avoid spam filters, all those things that you guys do at Salesforge. So
Mm.
you're going to run through a few things there. Now, welcome everybody. Hey, Matthew, Sebastian, Howard, Christine, Nathan, Jake. Hey, guys. Oh, we've got Bernie coming in, so we'll let Bernie in as well. Morning, Bernie. So guys, if you have questions at all as we go through, feel free to raise your hand or pop them in the chat. We'll try and monitor all this as we go. We love
Mm.
to make these things interactive, ask questions. You got Frank here for an hour or so. So take advantage of the experts that we have here while we've got them if you can. So Frank, over to you, mate.
Thanks. All right. Let me then start sharing. And uh, okay, so we're going to talk about cold email deliverability. So that's what we do here at Salesforge. So a bit about me before we kind of kick off things. So my name is Frank. I'm based in Europe. It's quite late right now. So typically, it's not the way around, but it's okay. I don't sleep actually much, but I run a company called Salesforge, but I also run a few other what we call forges. Essentially, we run multiple products, and all these products are designed to help businesses to deliver emails and deliver great emails and see results from those emails. So we've been around for quite some time, so about 2, 3 years. We have thousands of customers, predominantly in the US. And we're about to also launch LinkedIn, actually. So the ability to connect limited LinkedIn profiles. What we're going to discuss, so I've been, my background personally, prior to running this company, is I used to work in sales for over a decade in B2B. My former gig was a VP sales. I used to have a sales team of about 50 people. So we used to, send a lot of emails across, multitude of SDRs that they used to have, and do a lot of cold calls, etc. And we had, all the typical problems around spam, and not just, in email, but also, when you do cold calling, there's a lot of issues that were back in the days, and all of these issues are just, accelerating. So there's a lot of tech that's in the space. A lot of it is legacy tech. So we're building sort of, new breed of tech that essentially tackles the various spam filters, etc. So the idea is to educate on what's happening in the space and what you have to think about if you really want to improve your results. It's not actually that easy to run cold email these days. It's essentially as complicated as running Google Ads campaigns. You have to kind of think about a lot of different things, and you invest in a lot of different areas to actually make it happen. However, it does work today. So a lot of people think that cold email is dead. Cold email is not dead. There's many companies out there that actually make millions of dollars every single year just purely from cold email. So it is possible to generate definitely interesting sort of sums of money from it. But there's other naturally things that come in play on top of cold email. So at any point, feel free to stop me. So what I really want to cover today are what I call the four pillars of being actually successful in cold email. So if you have to think about what does actually success mean in cold email, it typically is across four pillars or four areas where you need to invest your attention, your resources, your time. So on one hand is infrastructure. We're going to talk about that in the further slide. The second one is what's called copy. So essentially what goes actually into the email itself. Third one is the data. Who are you actually messaging? because naturally, if you're going to be messaging the wrong people, nothing's going to happen. You're going to get a bunch of spam reports, and ultimately, your infrastructure will burn, and you will see no results, and you'll say that cold email is actually dead. And then the last one is actually orchestration. So how do you actually execute the campaigns? There's a lot that goes into that. So you have to think of, if you're actually looking to get results from it, you have to think about things like multi-threading, layering other channels if you want to drive more success. And then things like pacing is also super important.
I just
Right.
on it. Can I just stick on that
Yeah, go
copy
for it.
one back there and copy? Because people ask us all this all the time as well, like for SMS and iMessage, and what works best and what gets the best results. And copy is one of the most important things. I think. I know you've got to get it in the inbox, you've got to get it in front of people, but if you don't have
Mm.
good copy, um, that's one of the most important things that you've got there as well, to make sure you've got a good offer for people and make them intrigued to actually want to engage with it as well. Because
Mm.
I see a lot of copy that people write, and you just go, you could get 100% delivery rate and nobody's going to buy that anyway, because it's just not a good, not good copy basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, those are the four pillars. So let's start with the first one, with the infrastructure pillar. So um, in order to actually do any form of cold emailing, and if you're looking to actually scale up the activity, so scaling up the activity, so if you're sending only like 10 cold emails, 20 cold emails per day from your business, then it's totally fine. You don't have to even think about infrastructure. But a typical business, if you actually are a B2B business and you're actually scaling, and you're looking to reach out hundreds, sometimes thousands of companies out there, then you need to think about actually setting up what's called a dedicated email infrastructure. And so the reason why you want to do that is because you definitely don't want to be sending out any form of cold emails from your primary business domain, because if you're going to do that, you will inevitably get a bunch of spam reports. You will inevitably essentially putting your primary domain at risk, to a point where a bunch of your emails can start landing in spam. So you don't want that ever to happen. A lot of companies that come to us actually come to us with a burned primary business domain, and they're looking to solve their problem with the primary business domain. So don't do that. So don't essentially scale any form of cold email activity from your primary business domain. So what you need to do is you need to set up what's called secondary domains. They also called burner domains, parallel domains, etc. So let's take an example. We have a domain Salesforge.ai, right? So for Salesforge.ai, I would set up domains like, try Salesforge.ai, get Salesforge.ai, team Salesforge.ai, and so on and so forth, right? So you want to set up a bunch of different domains with a prefix or postfix. Could be, so for example, Salesforge team.ai, right? So you set those up. And really, if you want to optimize, so if you're scaling quite aggressively, so there's some companies that reach out to tens of thousands of companies on a monthly basis, sometimes hundreds of thousands of companies on a monthly basis, then you also have to consider about using not just multiple secondary domains, but also multiple domain registrars, and also what's called ESP. So ESP means email service provider. So Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 is a email service provider. So you want to use 2 to 4. So if you're going quite aggressively at scale, you definitely want to use at least 4. When you set up the domains, though, typically everybody in the industry sets up .com domains. .com is the king of all the domains out there, and then there are secondary domains. There are other geo-specific domains like .co.uk or .de, .fr. Essentially, if you're targeting specific territories, you might want to set those up. Other companies also set up like .org, .co, .net. Those are totally fine as well. But typically, you are sticking to .com because the whole internet was built on .com, and hence, just from a user standpoint, a user is just less likely to report a .com domain for spam, and less likely less likely, essentially, they're less likely to blacklist essentially also your domain, because many of the companies, especially the bigger ones, will be using anti-spam softwares. So that's not also something to consider. One of the things that still happens, doesn't matter how big or small the business is, companies don't have their basics sort of right with what's called the DNS of their actual domains. So it's things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC. I bet you come across these. If you want to check if everything's correct with your current business domain, you can just go to mxtoolbox.com. mxtoolbox.com, you can just type in your domain and you can check Two things. One is whether your DNS records are set up correctly. And two, you can check whether you also have any blacklists associated with your primary domain. So it's a third-party tool that most people out there would use to check their records. Now, so when you buy these, so the reason why you buy multiple secondary domains rather than one is because what you're doing is you're essentially diluting the sending across multitude of secondary domains rather than just one secondary domain. Because really, one single domain can typically handle only about 100 cold emails per domain per day. And this is like cold emails, which is typically spread across sort of, 2-3 mailboxes. But like really, typically that's really the max. But like one mailbox typically should be handling about 30 cold emails per day. That's one mailbox. But really, the deliverability is tracked on the domain level. So if somebody asks me, Frank, what is the really max that I could push on the domain level? That's really 100 cold emails per domain per day. On top of that, you have also what's called warm-up emails. So warm-up is so whenever you're sending cold emails, you're gonna get the bad signals from your prospect because inevitably you will get spam reports. Essentially, you'll get the bad signals. To counteract that, you need to do what's called warm-up. So that means you will be sending emails in a warm-up pool to other businesses, and you will also be receiving replies back naturally. So you're essentially warming up. So you're essentially mimicking real human behavior. And that's what warm-up means, if somebody doesn't know what warm-up is. And there's a bunch of providers out there on the market that more or less do the same job. Some are more of what I would describe premium warm-up pools, some are weaker warm-up pools, but they all pretty much do the same thing. They just have a few differences in there. So we have our own what we call premium warm-up pool. It comes for free when folks use our Salesforge sending software. So that's something actually that you do so when you buy these secondary domains, doesn't matter where you buy them, you definitely want to warm up your infrastructure for at least 2 weeks. That's a minimum 2 weeks, ideally 3 to 4 weeks. So you want to warm them up. Doesn't matter where you put them in which warm-up pool. And only then, after that period, you actually start sending out any emails. And then the warm-up has to be always on. So a lot of folks assume like they do warm up for a bit, like 2 weeks, and that's it. They just drop it. No, because like you need to always counteract the negative signals that come from cold emails. So that's why the warm up always has to stay on, because warm up actually sends the positive signals to Microsoft and Google that essentially owns majority of the B2B email traffic. So an example thing that happens actually in a warm-up pool is, let's say the email does land in spam in the warm-up pool. Then what the warm-up pool would do is that it would actually take your email out of spam and put it back into the primary inbox. The other thing that needs to happen, so once you have these domains set up, once the warm-up is done, you start sending a bunch of cold emails, you start seeing results, etc. Typically what happens is and also the reason why you're buying these secondary domains is you're actually putting these domains at risk, right? Because ultimately they're still going to get spam reports, etc. So what happens is over time these domains essentially burn, right? And they inevitably will have to be replaced. Typically after 6 to 9 months is a shelf life of a secondary domain. So typically you will have to replace, within a year, those domains to brand new domains. So you want to warm them up. And to understand what is the health of your domains at any given moment, you have to do what's called an inbox placement test. An inbox placement test, essentially, you would use these domains that you bought, and you just send to a bunch of Google accounts and a bunch of Microsoft 365 accounts just to see whether these mailboxes are landing in spam or not. And that's something you want to do ideally once a week, but you will do it once every couple of weeks. Worst case, once a month. You just want to check whether they're landing in spam or not. And trust me, they will be landing in spam, at least some of those inboxes or some of those domains, because maybe a domain has burned. So yeah, that's generally on the infrastructure. And I would say this is probably the most important stuff that you have to take away. There are a bunch of cold email infrastructure providers in the market. We also have like 3 softwares just for infrastructure. So again, just to kind of give you an example of what type of the infrastructures are, typically you would refer them to what's called ESPs. So the email service providers, so again, that's Google Workspace accounts that you can set up. You've got MS365 accounts that you can set up. Then there's non-Microsoft or non-Google accounts that you can set up what's called SMTP accounts, which are run on a shared IP pool typically, or dedicated IP. So depending on who is your ideal customer profile and what are the characteristics, whether you're targeting enterprise or maybe SMBs or agencies, whatever it is that you're targeting, some infrastructure is better than the other. And this is why there's multiple infrastructure. So it's not to say that one infrastructure is better than the other. So what also changes is that deliverability is a bit like a stock market where, for example, today, Google outperforms Microsoft 365. So if you're going to buy Microsoft 365 and you're going to buy Google, Google today will outperform Microsoft 365. But next month it may change. And so the reason why things change is because the way that essentially Microsoft and Google change a bunch of things on their end. So as a result, performance changes quite a bit and it fluctuates. But in order to have the best possible sort of stability when you are actually scaling, this is why the recommendation here is to have at least 2 email service providers that you're leveraging to send out cold emails. I think somebody had the
Yeah,
question.
there's a question there from Frank. Says, should we consider dedicated IP even if we're sending under 100,000 emails per month?
So a dedicated IP typically can only handle 100K max emails per month. This is a typical recommendation for any IPs out there, and that's what we recommend as well. So we have a product that does exactly that. Now, the dilemma with the dedicated IP is that because you're essentially banking your own reputation. So if you're doing a really good job around the data, so who you're targeting, the copy, you have a solid infrastructure just set up, right? So you're doing everything correctly. Yes, the recommendation is bank on your own IP. Now, the when it's not recommended to use your own IP is when you are in a sensitive category. So, for example, finance, so financial services like loans or any financial sort of products. I don't recommend using dedicated IPs, and I also don't recommend using dedicated IPs if you are touching big companies. So let's say big companies would be like essentially any company that has over 1,000 employees. They would typically use anti-spam softwares and a bunch of other things to protect their employees from any form of outside emails, including cold emails. So they can easily blacklist your IP. So that in those environments, it's not recommended to use any dedicated IPs, and it's only recommended to use shared IPs. So Google, Microsoft, and shared SMTPs, shared IP SMTPs, all these 3 sort of ESP types use shared IPs. So those are the recommended ones to use in enterprise environment.
Thanks, Matt. Can I just ask you a question as well, Frank, right? Because what you're talking about here is quite low numbers, right? Max 100 cold emails per domain per day, right? What
Yes.
really defines a cold email? And what I'm wondering here, right? Because I don't know this. Let's just say on my website, I have an opt-in
Yes.
for ABC, whatever.
Yeah.
And when the people opt in, they can tick a box that says, hey, we agree to receive information from you in the future. And
Yeah.
then every month I send out an email newsletter at the end of every month. Now, supposing that I get 50 people a day opt into that, by the end of the month, I've got, what's that, 30 times 15, like 1,500 people on
Mm-hmm.
my list, right?
Yeah.
And then I send out my newsletter. Now, those 1,500 people are they cold because I've never emailed them before? Because the domain providers, they don't know that they've opted in particularly and ticked my yes, I agree to receive information box, do they? Or do they?
So essentially, people that typically think of it this way. So if you have an opt-in, then typically what happens is you would put them into like some form of a newsletter, right?
Hmm.
That's what typically would happen, right? And people then sort of gradually would opt out from your newsletter, so they'll just simply unsubscribe. So for this sort of behavior, so these are not really classed, typically not classed as cold emails, but the dilemma is that you have not emailed them anything whatsoever, right? So
Hmm.
let's say this because this list is essentially not used, right? And then after say 6 months or 1 year, because you haven't used, like they would suspect any form of communication from you actually as a cold email, most likely. So the bottom line is, if you are suspecting to receive spam reports from your list, then you have to treat that audience more of as a cold audience, really, and then set up the corresponding infrastructure. However, if you are, if you have a list and you do not expect many spam reports whatsoever, then what I'm saying does not apply to you, and you have to use a different solution. Whether you use high level, for example, we use Beehive for newsletters, right? So what happens is we do have an opt-in, right? They sign up to our software, and we immediately put them into our newsletter, and we just keep sending them, newsletters like twice a week. That's what we do. But they expect that from us, and if they don't like a newsletter, just opt out, right? So, but like
Yeah.
you would not set up anything like this. So like what we're setting up here is only meant for ultimately people that we're reaching out who are, an ideal customer profile to our business, right? That we have never been, ever in touch. They don't know that we are, reaching out to them, but we have, a service or a product that we're looking to sell to them, and that's really a cold email, right? But we are expecting spam reports, right? We are expecting what's called negative signals against our infrastructure. Hence,
Yep.
to ensure that the infrastructure doesn't burn, overnight, we need to diversify, typically across, secondary domains. And the more you scale, then you have to think about registrars and multiple ESPs, etc. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that.
No worries. Alrighty. So the next one is bad copy kills good deliverability. So it's something exactly what you were mentioning, Gary. So you may have the best infrastructure setup, the most advanced infrastructure setup, but if you have a really crappy copy, it will kill your deliverability very fast these days. So it wasn't actually the case like maybe 3 years ago. So a lot of things have changed, from 3 years ago. So what has changed? So you have to avoid really templating at all costs, meaning any form of static communication that goes into an email, you have to try and avoid that. Because these days in cold emailing, Google and Microsoft, they're very, very smart. So what happens is, let's say we're going to send a template to like 1,000 people, and some of the individuals, let's say in Google, would report your email as spam, right? So they go and report it as spam. What Google does then, Google starts to do correlational analysis between the spam report and what's in the content. And then the further emails that would go out from your infrastructure that have exactly the same nearly copy, and you're just changing the first name, you're only changing a few bits. Google understands that this copy means spam, and then you are landing in spam. So you're landing in spam essentially not because of your infrastructure or your IPs or anything like that. You're purely landing in spam because of the copy, because you kept on using the same copy, over and over again. So copy freshness is super important these days, and the more programmatic you can make it every time, the better for your overall deliverability, your pipeline results, et cetera, et cetera. So there's multiple ways there's a couple ways to typically that you solve that. So we're gonna go into that in a bit. But like ultimately, if you want to drive what I call the best possible copy, figuring out how can you do it programmatically at what's called the contact level. So meaning it's a lead, it's an individual, right, that you're reaching out. What is the information that we can use about them on a contact level? So not company level, but contact level about them to drive the best possible copy. And that's really what you need to do today. If you are sort of refraining from that, or you're lazy, or trying to be cheap, whatever, essentially it will bite you. So typically, if somebody asks me, Frank, what's really the best copy? And there's gazillions of frameworks out there on the internet. You can literally Google cold email frameworks, and you can use a bunch of them. But I typically say lead with pain, not gain. So what that means is don't just talk about your product or blah, blah, blah. Really try and talk about the pain. And sometimes in the first email, you don't have to even mention the product that you're selling. You can just try and validate whether the pain that you're solving with your product, your service is actually there in the first place. And that could be literally in the first email. And you don't have to, talk about your product. So as an example, let's take Salesforge, right? So we help companies to solve their spam problems. So I can just reach out and say, hey, Gary, how's it going? Hopefully the weather is really good down under there, down under. And I was wondering whether you're facing any deliverability problems right now in your business. Question mark, right? I'm not even selling my product, nothing. But you're just asking a simple question whether they have a particular problem. Maybe you made some observation. Maybe somehow I figured out that a lot of Gary's emails are landing in spam, right? And I would make that observation, right? But like ultimately, the more you think about the pain rather than the product or your service that you're having, the more likely you are to receive a response, and you should be getting actually significantly better results than just doubling down on whatever it is that you're selling. The other thing that you should do is avoid what's called spammy language. So there are things what's called spam checkers. So meaning what goes into the email, super, super important. So you have to avoid today things like free even, When you mention the word free, it's a pretty bad word in the email, especially if you have never reached out to that company. A loan, or a credit, or Nigerian prince, any of these words trigger spam filters, especially in the bigger companies. So they're definitely looking at what is in the email. And attachments, for example, is also like a bad thing. So like it's like what goes in terms of the content, like links, attachments, all of that. Companies are treading carefully because essentially the employees on their ends are opening up a bunch of links, and then stuff gets installed on their machines, and then etc. So that they're naturally trying to protect their employees. So if you want to avoid saying the same thing, there's literally, as I was mentioning, there's two ways to do that. And we're going to look at an example in a bit, but you can use what's called spin tags. So remember this word, whenever you're doing any form of, I would say, copywriting, like whether that's email or even SMS, whatever, so you want to make sure that you're sort of somehow programmatically changing the content. So spin tags means you're saying the same thing, but you're just using different words. So an example would be like, hey, hi, hello, right? So you're saying the same thing, but you use really three different words. And you want to do that in the first email for at least 50% of the content. So the 50% of the content should be spin text. Now you can do it manually. There are some tools that you can spin text on the internet. So we have one as well. Or within our software, for example, Salesforge, there's a feature like auto spin text. But like ultimately, like do not essentially send a template. So you either spin text it, or the second option is to use AI. Now the downside with using AI, naturally it costs money. But with AI, every email would be arguably unique because it typically gets computed by a bunch of different softwares. Now, the other thing that you have to think about copy and what actually leads to high performance, some people disagree, but actually a lot of data says otherwise, that subject lines, you want to write them in lowercase because it just looks odd when you receive an email and everything's lowercase as a subject line. And as a result, what happens is people assume it's a human that wrote that because all automation softwares would never do that typically. So what we receive better results if the subject lines are lowercase. The copy itself, you stick to 50 words. The reason why 50 words is a strong recommendation is because, for example, today, if you are sending emails to Microsoft 365, so that means a lot of your users are a lot of your potential customers are using Microsoft, and it's a cold email, then if you have more than 50 words, typically it has a negative impact on your performance. So this is why there's a bit of a recommendation. Try to stick to today at least, but to a maximum having 50 words in the copy itself. And then the other thing that people just typically just never test is naturally the PS line at the bottom. So imagine you have a copy, you talk about the pain, you're trying to validate the pain, but you definitely wanna test the PS line, and in the PS line, there's a bunch of different things that you can go into that. So, for example, we in a lot of cases use like, hey, would you like a free checklist, or we're trying to maybe pitch something else, or just trying to have a different angles. But essentially, just another opening, another opportunity for you to pitch something else from your business, or provide free value or free resource, etc. So definitely PS lines have been proven to actually drive typically significantly better results, but they're very actually rarely used. So I think there was a question
Yeah,
in the
Liam
chat.
was just clarifying. Says subject lines stick to 50 words or the whole copy. I think you were saying the
No,
copy,
it's a
right?
copy 50 words. Sorry, yeah, it's a bit
Yeah,
unclear.
that's
But
that's
subject
pretty
lines
that's pretty
lowercase.
short, isn't
On
it?
the subject lines, I would say I only recommend 2 or 3 words max. There's also a bunch of data on the internet by another company called Lavender. I think they say 2 or 3 words. Like, think about it. Like, important people never do like super long subject lines. So I would, let's say, my business again. The subject line, I always say it's about the pain. So the pain that I would try to address would be like email deliverability, right? So I just put that as a subject line. So something that's like short and snappy, lowercase email deliverability, and I would just send that. And or 3 words like max. And then, yeah, the copy itself, so the main body is 50 words. And that's due to Microsoft predominantly. But also, like, if you think about it, that I didn't put that in here, but a typical user would only spend about 6 seconds on average to scan your email copy. 6 seconds. That's all you have for somebody to scan your email copy.
It's not long, is it?
Yeah, so that's another reason why you want to stick to about 50 words or so, right? So then Leon asked, any data on using no. I wouldn't typically recommend, because this typically people have a negative reaction to reply and forwarding, because they feel like they're being misled. Typically, there's a negative impact from that. So I would not, Leon, recommend using that at all. It's not recommended, not just from my side, but for across the whole industry. Like nobody, like no professionals actually really use that, because the problem is that people get misled, and as a result, you receive more spam reports. So you like today, figuring out a way how to reduce the number of spam reports from your prospects, super, super important. So that's why we're talking about all these different things. So naturally, when you're writing a copy, you want to send a follow-up email. I always recommend just one follow-up email, max two, but these should never be things like what's called bumps. You never want to send a bump. Or like things like any thoughts, question mark, don't do that. Like people who get really annoyed, and they've seen that in the past. If you are sending actually another email, which is a follow-up email, give them more reasons, at least another reason to respond back to you. That could be like a case study, proof, some sort of social proof, right? So why I should be, engaging with you, maybe not an angle, or maybe not a pain that you're trying to validate, like something else, but like never do, a typical bump. So yeah. The other thing is you definitely want to mix the text. So typically people just think about text, and let's just send another message, etc. But when if it is okay in your industry to use GIFs, memes, videos, etc., I would definitely do that, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest if you mix up, text with other modes of communication, then you do see significantly higher results. And you only want to do that in the follow-up email, not in the first email, due to HTML. If there's HTML in the first email, it has a negative impact on deliverability. So you want to always send the first email, at least what's called as plain text. So a lot of software support, not a lot of software, but the new gen software support function called send this email as plain text, meaning it removes all the HTML. So that is important to do in the first email. In the second email, if you have HTML, it's totally fine. And then the last thing is localization. This probably doesn't apply to us, but like the Europeans, there's a bunch of different, languages in Europe. And if you do localization, meaning you actually write emails in German in Germany, and in French in France or whatever, you see up to 2x relative lift. Because guess what? Most of the cold emails, or most of the spam emails, whatever, they are all written in English. So whenever you get an email in another language, you do not have a negative connotation to these emails. You do not perceive them as any form of spam or cold email. You're actually a lot more positive about that. So if you have any markets, where they don't speak English, I highly recommend you test the localization, because it can make a significant impact. All right. This is an example of spin tags. So we talked about spin tags, right? So most folks in the industry do use spin tags, and this is just some random software. It's not even our software. But like the logic here is the spin starts, and you're saying, hey, hello, hi, and spin. So the system will just randomly pick one of the three words. But as I mentioned to you guys, like at least 50% of the initial email should be spin tags if you're looking to improve your results. And there's no need to spin tag second email. Because once you land in the primary, it's not like you're going to go to spam. So it's just the first email, because the first email dictates whether you're actually landing in the primary or any other folder. That's why the first email, this is why you remove links, HTML, you're spin taxing, you're doing essentially everything you can to land in the primary. All right, so we're done with the copy, and we talked about the most important stuff. Now we're all going over to data, or people essentially that we're going after, right? So again, we may have the best infrastructure, we have the best copy, but if we're sending it to the wrong people, first of all, nothing will happen, meaning you will not get replies probably, just negative replies, and you'll get a bunch of spam reports. So think of it this way: if you are sending emails to the wrong people, typically you'll get a ton more spam reports, and that has a negative impact in your infrastructure, and your infrastructure just burns faster. So we talked about, the requirement to replace the domains. You'll potentially need to replace them much, much faster if you just keep on sending emails to the wrong people. Somebody asked another question in chat from Ananda. How do we do spin tags in GHL? Gary, does high
I don't
level?
think.
I don't
Yeah,
think
I
they
don't
do.
think there's a native one in there. There is actually an app in the marketplace from all the apps from
Okay.
Rupert Level Up Marketplace. So if you search that, all the apps Spintax, you'll find that, and then you basically
So you don't
pop
really
that in
need
there.
to do this for like inbound stuff, like the opt-ins. Like everything that we're talking here about is really about cold emails outbound, right? So you don't have an opt-in. So like you don't really need spin tags. So we never spin tags, anything where we have an opt-in. Generally speaking, high level and HubSpot, Salesforce, none of them are really designed to have good email durability. It's just not how the backend is built. That's also the reason why we have a native integration with high-level, bidirectional. So what typically happens is folks have a lot of data that they store in high level. They sync up with Salesforce, they execute, and they sync up the disposition, essentially what happened with the contact back with high level. That's what typically happens. So same reason with HubSpot and Salesforce, like you can send definitely emails out from the CRMs, but their email delivery infrastructure is just not designed for cold emailing. They typically tell you to stop sending cold emails. That is their typical support answer. So this is why the execution of any form of cold emails happens in another software, where the softwares and the backend is actually designed to send out cold emails. So yeah, that's why it's not a surprise that Hilo doesn't have spin tags, because it's not within
part
their
of their
product
thing.
strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So back to the copy. So back to the data. So super important. First of all, you need to know who your ICP is, and you want to define that. I'm still surprised today how many companies don't know who really is potentially their what's called golden ICPs. These are like golden leads they want to go after, right? And they really match various sort of things in our business and why we think they're really good for our business. Typically, you look at average deal size, retention, and a bunch of other things. And then there's some ICPs that are, let's call it, weaker, but essentially you have a good understanding who you should be going after. So the next thing that you should really do is you should start with what I typically call anything but a database. So there's a bunch of databases on the internet like Apollo, ZoomInfo, etc., and you can just pull a lot of data. But the problem is, with this data set, there are no signals, there's no logic, and you're just sending emails. And essentially, you typically see the worst results from a general list that you're just pulling. What you should do instead, and this is some ideas that we have a bunch of them here, is you should try and do stuff with signals in mind. So whether a company is hiring, whether there is some money, you can also have a signal based on what's called website visitors. So for example, you can install tags from, say, a company like RB2B, where you can de-anonymize traffic on your site. And there's a bunch of other solutions. So essentially, de-anonymized website visitors is a thing. So you can identify users and you can reach out to them, especially if they didn't sign up to your service or your product. And there's also third-party website trackers as well. So essentially, there's some form of signals that we can use to go after. The other example would be we can build out what's called lookalikes. So just like in
Sorry,
Facebook, there's
Frank.
lookalikes.
Can I just pause you on that? Can you clarify that a little bit more? Because like if you've got a list, but how do you know? How do you gather that and then get those signals in to go, oh, these guys are hiring, they're growing, whatever that signal is like, how do you
Sure.
get a
So
list like
so
that?
typically, like there are signal-based sort of, let's call it, platforms. So essentially, it doesn't have to be a poll, but essentially you can search for platforms that provide signal-based data. Essentially, the signal could be something hiring, funding. There's like typically like 10 to 20 signals that are workable in any typical business, and you would just play around with it. I recommend to play around with at least 3 signals that actually make sense to your business. So we are a software company. And we typically target, seed, Series A, Series B companies, essentially companies that really need to scale, and they want to scale through cold email, right? So we definitely are looking at, fundraising announcement for Series A, for example. We would look at if somebody became head of sales, somebody became RevOps manager, etc. So these are the typical titles that we would target. And if they get hired into a new position, we want to send them say congrats on your new title, new job, etc. and reach out to them. So there's a bunch of them. Like they all do the same thing. It's like signals these days like a bit of a commodity. Because in majority of signals are tied to LinkedIn. So the signals do come from LinkedIn. So if your audience is not on LinkedIn, then I don't actually know if there's any other signals or whether there's many signals actually that are not based on LinkedIn. So yeah, there's just a caveat there on the signals because majority of signals do work on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can execute cold emails, you can execute LinkedIn messages, etc. But yeah, there's a bunch of data vendors out there. There's other data vendors that provide what's called lookalike data as well. So imagine you have right now 10 customers that are your, let's say, top customers in your business, and you just want to find more similar customers to those. So you want to build what's called lookalike audiences and find these similar companies. And again, there are data vendors out there. We also provide lookalike data in our software called LeadsForge. There's other companies like Ocean.io that provide lookalike data. But yeah, like if you struggle to find similar companies, I highly recommend to build huge lookalike lists and target those companies. So it's much better than pulling data from just a random database. Yeah, I'm just thinking about. There's another thing that's called contact lookalikes as well. So imagine these are your top 10 contacts within your existing book of business, and you just want to find more similar people to that. So that's another way to build lookalikes. So typically, folks build what's called company lookalikes. So these are 20 companies. We just want to find more, but there's another thing to do. You can build contact or lead lookalikes. So literally on a contact level, you can also build that. So then the other one would be so you have a lot of competitors, and typically everybody has competitors, right? But you would love to find out what would be the way to target your competitor accounts. So what you can do is pull what's called followers. So there's logic so that you can pull company followers of your competitors or adjacent companies in your space or some sort of communities if there's any form of communities. So you can just again search for company followers or LinkedIn followers, and it's also something that we provide. But essentially, within the follower base, a bunch of the followers of that company are definitely customers of that company, and as a result, you can build a list quite nicely that way as well. There's a question.
Yeah, Leon's a bit lost on this. Where are we doing this search? You said just search online for
There's a bunch of
signal-based
solutions, but
lead lists. Is there a couple
so
of
we have one
examples
called
maybe?
leadsforge.ai. You can check it out later, but so you can go in there. So that's our own solution. But essentially, like whenever I'm mentioning like lookalikes or followers, you can just Google it, ChatGPT it. You will come up with the different solutions on the web. But it's just kind of to hint you towards how can you build much better lists than going to just random database, right? Because there's some sort of logic, right? And with every single one of these lists, whether that's lookalike or followers, etc., the copy is also corresponding to that list because naturally you want to change the copy and the angle. The
So I
other
think
thing that
if you just to make it really simple, I guess what you're saying is like just on a very basic level, if your audience is plumbers, you don't just want to go and get a list of plumbers, you want to get a list of plumbing companies that have at least 10 employees, for example, because they're going to be a company that are of reasonable size and can pay for your service. It's like something like that. That's a very basic example of what I think you're kind of explaining there and using those signal lists or something to qualify them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of another example here. One sec. Something that so let's say we work at a company called High Level, which is a CRM, and we have a goal to target HubSpot. So essentially users that use HubSpot, right? And we wanna the logic would be to use follower lists of HubSpot. So whoever is following HubSpot as a company on the internet, we want to target these followers. So and then in these softwares, what you would do is you would just enter HubSpot.com, and then you would get a bunch of companies that actually, or users, actually people that follow HubSpot. And then from that, you can qualify the list. So let's say you only want to go after founders or, VP sales, whatever that is, whatever the title is. But the source, like where are the, what's this audience? These are followers of HubSpot.com. They are following this company. It doesn't mean they are customers, but that's the closest thing to identify a customer of your competitor. So
Yeah. And there's plenty of people that can do
um,
that stuff for you as well. If you don't want to figure it out and do it yourself, go to Fiverr and say, hey, I need someone that can
yeah,
get a list
Fiverr,
for
yeah,
me. There's plenty of people
yeah.
out there that specialize in these things anyway.
Yeah, so we build a software that Fiverr, like there are definitely different ways. But yeah, the other thing which is quite easy is tech stack. Let's say I want to find all the companies on the internet that use high level, or all the companies that use HubSpot, etc. There is like a simple, actually, there are multiple simple ways to do that. So the biggest company for tech stack identification is called Built With on the internet, but there's other companies like us and Apollo and a bunch of other ones where, again, you can enter the technology that you're targeting, and you want to go after. So like very frequent ones would be like Shopify, like I want to target all companies that use Shopify, or because they sell something to Shopify, merchants, stuff like that. So yeah. But once you have the list, doesn't matter what list you have, lookalikes, competitors, tech stack, etc., you definitely want to additionally qualify whether in that list, these companies that you're reaching out meet your ICP criteria. So, like in our case, is this a B2B companies? Because we cannot reach out to B2C companies. We need to know whether this is a B2B companies. And then we may ask like different questions. Is this a PLG company or SLG? PLG means product-led growth or sales-led growth. Like you can ask a bunch of different questions. And there are softwares that you can ask questions about these leads. Because again, ultimately, if you're just going to get a random list, and there's a lot of crappy leads in there, and you're going to send them an email, and then you're going to get a bunch of spam reports, it kills your infrastructure. So like the next step really that you want to do is do what's called qualification. It's a very typical term in sales. So you get a list, then you qualify, and only then you send them an email, you send them a LinkedIn message, you call them, etc. Right? So qualification is definitely something that you want to think about once you have the list. How do you qualify? Yeah, back in the old days, it used to be done by humans, or like a sales rep would do it, or a founder would do it. But yeah, just plugging that list into any sort of sending software, don't recommend doing that due to inevitably you receiving a bunch of spam reports. Then the other thing that you want to do is, and has to do more with ensuring that your conversion rate on a company level or account level significantly increases. So I always recommend that if you're targeting decently sized companies, so that's typically, in my opinion, like more than 10 employees, that you should be reaching out to 2 or 3 contacts per company, either sequentially or in parallel. That means you take 2 individuals from that company rather than just one, and you reach out to them. And I highly recommend that because conversion rates will be significantly higher than you just reaching out to one person at that company. So, yeah. So that's on data front. So I would say this is like the most important bits. I can talk about every topic like nonstop. But like I would say, all the stuff that I outlined, this probably would be the most important bits and something that I would say you'll probably learn something. Now, the last thing is what's called orchestration, or like essentially the piece around like sending the actual email and what are the things you have to think about. So once you have the infrastructure set up, once you have good copy figured out, and once you have the right leads, like the execution, the actual sending, what do you do? Like what happens there? So when you set up a campaign or what's called a sequence, you really want to only have like 2 or 3 emails. So I already mentioned that. So you send an initial email out, and then you send up a 1 follow-up email, 2 follow-up emails, and that's it. That's all you do. And the reason why you only send, 2, 3 emails in total is because you have to really figure out a way how to avoid spam reports. Because if you will be getting red spam reports, as I said, you will be landing spam. So sending more emails to the same individual over a short span of time, inevitably you will get a spam report. So actually the best strategy is you send out these 2, 3 emails, And then after a quarter, you can send out another 2 to 3 emails again to the same individual. Because if it's your ICP, so your ideal customer profile, priorities change because it's something that you can not really control is the timing. When's the best time to reach out? So you reach out initially 2 to 3 emails, and then you reach out after a quarter again. So essentially, lead recycling or like re-engagement is like super important. The other things that you can do on top of these 2, 3 emails is do social channels, LinkedIn or calling or whatever else that you have at your disposal, but don't send more than 2, 3 emails. Highly recommend. Correct pacing is also very important. Sometimes people send an email today and then tomorrow they come with a second email and they ask, "Hey, what do you think about it?" And here's another reason to respond back. It's too fast. It takes people time. They're in meetings, they're busy, etc. You do not send, 2 emails within 24 hours or something. It's just not something that you do. So there has to be 3 to 7 day interval, especially these days. Let's say in Europe, US, etc. People are on holidays. Maybe this week they're on holiday and you didn't get out of office response. So that's why, for example, in our case, we would send maybe 3 emails and we would send 1 email a week. That's all we would do. So we would pace it out even longer during the holiday season. The other thing you want to do is what's called kill open rate tracking. So a lot of companies are used to tracking open rates, and tracking open rates is like a vanity metric a bit. Like it's like impression data in like Meta ads or other advertising platforms. And in email, the reason why it doesn't work is because there are at least 30 different things that impact this metric positively or negatively. So that means it's never accurate, never ever accurate. And as a result, it misleads you every time. So, and the second thing, it actually has a negative impact on your email deliverability. So the way that it works is, in order to actually track open rates, you have to insert this what's called invisible image into the email. So whenever email gets opened, the pixel fires and sends a ping to the server saying that this email was opened. That's how it works. However, whenever you're targeting some companies that have security measures in place, and whenever they see that you're tracking stuff in the email, they assume this could be a suspicious email or unwanted email. As a result, you may be alerting directly in spam, or something else will happen. But also, the impact is negative essentially on your performance. So the most sophisticated companies in the world never track open rates at all. What they do track, and which is a true measure of performance, it has no negative impact, is bounce rate. So if emails are bouncing, it will negatively impact infrastructure. Reply rates, super important. And then opt-out rates. If you have very high opt-out rates, that means you're probably targeting, so I mean, 2 things that means. You're either targeting the wrong people or your copy is totally off. And which is why you have high opt-out rates or unsubscribe rates, right? So it's the same thing. So these are the 3 things that typically people would track. So they would typically kill open rates. Then the other thing, so in order to reduce the bounce rates, you really need to validate the emails every time when you launch a campaign, every time. The problem is people come and go, right? They leave businesses, quite frequently these days, right? There's a huge staff turnover in most companies. So you want to validate and that you want to make sure you keep the bounce rate below 2%, and best-in-class companies keep it below 1%. If it's above 2%, you should stop your campaign immediately, because having the negative impact on your infrastructure is not something you want to have. So don't use dirty lists. Definitely always validate. The other thing that I already mentioned, HTML has a negative impact on email, the first email. So you want to send in cold emails what's called as plain text, which means it strips out all HTML. And then as a result, you typically will see significantly better deliverability. It's very straightforward. So not all software support this capability, but you will see in some softwares will say send emails plain text. So the other thing, this kind of leads a bit to spin taxing. Like one of the ways to avoid the necessity maybe to have spin taxing is when you do what's called multivariate testing. So essentially you have, the sequence and you have so many leads and you want to test different copy angles, like 10, maybe 20, whatever. It's the same as spin taxing essentially, right? Because sending different copies. And you're confusing Google spam filters and Gemini and stuff like that. So, but if you want to really understand whether you are seeing better results in a particular variant when you're testing, you want to make sure you have at least 1,000 leads for this, test to be statistically significant. If it's below, it's like tossing a coin. There's like, some people say, oh yeah, I've seen better results, but from a statistical significance standpoint, it doesn't make sense what you're saying. So, so there has to be significant volume in the variant, and actually, the more variants you have in place, the more actually leads you need to have. So you can read about it online. Why when you're doing any form of A/B testing, multivariate testing, you need to have a ton of leads going through. It doesn't matter whether it's an ad copy, cold email copy, whatever that is. I think there was another question in chat. Yeah, iOS killed open tracking. That's one of the 30 reasons. And then Howard had a question. How long did you recommend wait after sending the first 2-3 emails before sending again? It was a quarter, so 3 months. So that means over a course of a year, you should be reaching out to a prospect 4 times. So think of, like, if you're familiar with OKRs, think of quarterly OKRs. Like on a quarterly basis, typically priorities change in the business, and it's a good time to reach out again. And some people perceive cold email these days actually not as cold email, but as advertising. So what you're doing is you are advertising. The 3 emails that you're sending is like, it's an ad essentially, right? That lands in the inbox. So you're sending these 3 emails, let's say a span of 2 weeks, and then you don't send anymore, right? So you're avoiding the spam reports, and you're coming back again after a quarter. And you can look at it as a bit like advertising. A lot of people actually perceive that, especially those that send like thousands and millions of emails on a monthly basis. It's much cheaper than actually spending money with Google Ads. Right? So, okay, so other thing, so the bonus stuff is blending in LinkedIn or calls results up to 6x relative lift. It's not just that, but actually your social media presence. So for example, Gary has a fantastic media presence on Facebook. Guess what? That presence that he has on Facebook and probably a bunch of other platforms has a positive impact on all of his channels. And that's a lot of businesses don't think about it. So, for example, we have businesses that come to us and they're literally like nobody. They created the business yesterday and they expect great results in cold email. But businesses that have social media presence, and essentially there's somebody, right? So they will see significantly better results in cold email. And one of the ways you can increase the results is by overlaying other channels. So you're reaching out also to the same people via LinkedIn, you're calling them, etc. You will see a lift in cold emailing, plus good website, plus strong social media presence. Howard is asking, how do you avoid things like holiday messages? So you can't avoid them. So some people, what they do is they stop during the holiday season. They just pause the campaigns and they reactivate after the holidays. While other people, they don't care. They just keep on sending the emails. So the only I think audience that you could do this is people that are always working. So for example, founders like Gary's probably always working, right? So working
There's no
every day.
holidays.
That means he'll check his email even during any holiday, right? So
Yep.
but a typical employees will never check because they're on holiday, right? And probably when they come back, they'll probably delete all the emails or whatever. So it depends on who is it that you're targeting. And then sometimes it makes sense just to keep on sending nonstop, and sometimes it makes sense to pause for a few days before you resume again. Okay, so we have covered orchestration. So again, recap: infrastructure, copy, data, and orchestration. I shared with you the most important bits, and I'm gonna dive deeper just into some bits, like a bit more visually, because there was a lot of text in there, just to kind of give you a better understanding. And then feel free to stop me again. Feel free to ask questions. These are very, very good questions. Hopefully it's useful. If you have specific questions, just keep on asking. So I did mention about open tracking pixel, right? This is an example of what happens when you have the open tracking pixel built in, and then this happens. So Google today, which happened last year, has started to label emails that have this invisible image, saying there are essentially, this message might be suspicious of spam, and it says show images because there's an image in there. It's an invisible image, and Google has identified that, and that's an open tracking pixel. What happens is if you're going to click on show images, the image will pop, but it's still invisible. and it will trigger the pixel. That's what will happen.
Yeah.
But the problem is whenever a user receives this email, they have a negative connotation with your email. So that's a reason why you don't want to be tracking open rates these days, because if Google shows this label to a user, it will have a negative impact on your performance. And that's literally started to happen last year. As a result, more companies actually stopped using open tracking pixel. There's a question from Howard. Are hyperlinks and things like high-level triggered links bad or okay in the first email? Any form of links, if you are including them at scale, and typically everything is at scale, in the first email, it's bad. So we had examples, but this maybe applies maybe a bit more to the financial industry, but we definitely had examples where you include a link in the email, and you land always in spam. And then we took the link out from the email, you landed in the primary. So the problem was the link. So definitely there's a logic, because essentially whatever happened, that link triggers spam filters. So that's why if you want to include the link, you include that in the second in the follow-up email, if it's your own link. The links that are okay to use are well-known links. So for example, a Google Drive link is very good, because nobody has problems with Google, right? Because or a Calendly link, it's very well used, or a YouTube link, totally fine links. But if you're using a link like mynameisgary.com, it's a custom unique link. It does not have a reputation, like global reputation, like Google.com or YouTube.com, etc. Right? So it's a bit like depends on which link that is. Um, so
Depends on
so
how they put it in as well. If they hyperlink it, if you just drop the link in, if you hyperlink it on certain words like click here, like
yeah,
that's a
what I
that's a
do
great
is
one I always see people do. It's like
yeah. What I recommend, it's a bit of a hack where I would type Salesforge, open brackets, dot, close brackets, AI. So it would never hyperlink. So none of the email service providers will ever hyperlink, because I just put brackets and a dot in there. But a typical human will get it. That's Salesforge.ai. So again, a recap: Salesforge, open brackets, dot, close brackets, AI. All right. The next thing, I haven't mentioned this, but happens with orchestration. So when you are sending cold emails, you need to do what's called inbox rotation, and many softwares support that today. What that means is, imagine we have 3 leads, and we have 3 email accounts that we have set up from, let's say, one domain. Then for lead 1, inbox 1 will be used. For lead 2, inbox 2 will be used, and for lead 3, inbox 3 will be used. So we're not sending all the 3 emails from inbox 1, right? But it rotates. Like, inbox rotation is very important today. So there's a rotational logic that happens in cold email. So most cold email softwares, that if they do say they specialize in cold email, you want to check, do you do inbox rotation? Has a significant impact. So rotating inboxes at execution, because for example, today in my own account, I have like 400 email accounts. What happens is it rotates. Doesn't matter how many emails I send. One mailbox doesn't get slammed with all the emails. It spreads the load across all the inboxes that I have. So, and there has to be rotational logic. The other thing, so this is this changes every time. So, but there's a thing what's called ESP matching. So a lot of people believe that today, that if your prospects, and most of them, use let's say Google, and again you can check whether they use Google or Microsoft, etc., in mxtoolbox.com. And the belief is that if, let's say, majority of your prospects use Google, you should also use Google on your end. So this is typically when you set up company or you set up secondary domains, like you want to use the ESP of your ICPs. And because that will drive significantly better results. So like Outlook to Outlook or Google to Google will drive better results. And that used to be true a while back, but today it has changed. And actually, the king of email durability is Google. And funny enough, Google to Outlook or Google to Google has best deliverability, and Outlook to Outlook has pretty bad deliverability today. So these things change, but there's definitely a concept that's called ESP matching that you can kind of think about whether you want to do a lot more matching. So essentially, applies specifically in cases if you have a lot of mailbox from a specific email service provider, so like Outlook, etc. Then you can think about it. The other thing that we mentioned, email spam checker, right? So here's an example. This is our own spam checker. You can check it out. But essentially, you put in the copy and tells you whether there's any words that are sensitive. So the word Nigerian is very sensitive. And then free and loan is yellow. It really depends on the ICP. But like you want to essentially remove as much of the red stuff and the yellow stuff in the copy so it doesn't trigger any spam filters. The other one is, so like I mentioned, maximum 3 emails in the sequence. It's very straightforward, right? So initial email and up to 2 follow-up emails, and only send the follow-ups with additional reason, at least one reason why you're sending another email. Don't do bumps. What's happening? CTA is very important. So CTA means call to action. If somebody doesn't know, but essentially there's what's called a soft CTA and a hard CTA. So a hard CTA, essentially, you're driving towards a meeting. You're asking, hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time in the calendar next week on Tuesday? That's a hard CTA. A soft CTA, and this is what's typically recommended in the initial email, is this a priority? Question mark. So it's an open-ended question. And so you definitely do soft CTAs because it has been proven that CTAs have a significant impact. So what is the call to action in the email to the actual results? So time is money. So for example, I don't like grabbing 15 minutes. But again, the other thing that you can do is, so because it's recommended to really have a soft CTA in the first email. So is this a priority? Is this on your radar? Is this on your roadmap? Or whatever the question is. But it's an open-ended question. And then you can, in the follow-up email, you can lead with the hard CTA. Some people don't want to chat about stuff on the email. They actually want to chat about stuff over a call. But I would not do a hard CTA in the first email because a lot of things can be hashed out over a quick email, WhatsApp, whatever. You don't need a call. So yeah. Here are some soft CTAs examples that are significantly longer because I prefer typically, a soft CTA, which is like short and snappy. Is this a priority? Is this on your radar, etc. But here are some examples of where you can have significantly longer CTA. And so what you'll notice here is that one of the things that works really well is if in your copy you have numbers. So this is actually overall copy. So the CTA or the whole body, if you actually are putting numbers down, it can increase, so the typical thing is that you typically say, hey, I can increase your, I can generate, 50K in revenue within 30 days, So you're saying what's the improvement and how long will it take, right? So, and that works quite well, but ultimately you want to share some sort of numbers within the copy. So there's also correlation between having numbers in the copy, essentially what is the improvement for a particular business, and actual results. And if you have no numbers, then your copy is less credible, weaker. As a result, you are seeing worse results. So gold nugget number 8, just on the PS line. Again, a recap. Here's an example of somebody sharing some sort of random link. There's a lot of links. This is not really best practice. You can see there's way too many links, right? So this is actually like the other thing I want to say here, like when you see so many links, this is not good. So one link max. You think of it this way, one link max. And if that is a link, then for example, what I would do, and this is what I do personally, is I have a link, I think, in my signature to my LinkedIn profile. So that's a solid, what's called tier 1 link. And then another link to YouTube. So these are solid tier 1 links. Nobody should block me on tier 1 links. Even a Google Sheet, nobody should block me on a Google Sheet. You can share an open Google Sheet, which could be like a checklist for your customers. Again, that's a solid tier 1 link. All right, the other one is I mentioned no links, images in the first email, but yes in the follow-up emails. Very straightforward. I mentioned also to spice up your text with other forms of communication. So personalized gifts or whatever. Again, a bunch of different tools, but here's an example. This is something that I use at the bottom of the funnel. Bottom of the funnel means it's closer towards after the meeting has happened, and I'm chasing the prospect towards close 1, meaning I'm trying to collect the money, right? So and then they're ghosting me, and I'm trying to get a response from them, right? So, but you definitely want to kind of spice things up, and so I highly recommend you do that. Because this is a bit of what's called a pattern interrupt. Whenever you're doing anything that's a pattern interrupt, you typically always see positive results. I don't think whenever I was doing any form of pattern interrupt, like something funny, etc., I was putting in the email that I saw actually worse results. Like when you have a bit of a pattern interrupt, you typically see better results. Maximum 50 words. Don't be this person on the left. Yeah, maximum 50 words. And again, another reminder, it's because of Microsoft 365 today. Microsoft, for some reason, likes shorter emails. As a result, you have better deliverability. The other thing why they need to be shorter is because a lot of people still read their emails on a mobile device. So on the right-hand side, you can see some random email from Nabil who was applying for just a job, whatever. But you can see that his whole email fits into the screen. I don't have to scroll, right? So this is really the longest email you want to write, but it actually has to fit. You like if you're scrolling, it's just too long. So yeah, and then, again, another reason is still most emails are being read on a mobile device these days.
You like
And that's all I have for you guys.
No, looks good.
I actually went all the time.
That's a lot of info. It's like email is not easy anymore, is it? Like there's so many little nuances to all these things that need to be done now if you want to get that into that inbox. And there's a lot of correlation there with SMS as well, like the no link in first email, having the copy, making sure you change it up. There's a lot of correlation in that stuff as well. I think people understand that it's required with email, but they still don't actually understand that's actually required with SMS as well. So much of that stuff would apply to SMS also. So thank you, mate.
No worries. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Thank you, mate. Do we have any last questions for Frank? We had a few through there, and yeah, Leon was asking towards the end there, can you have too many links in an email just as you were putting that? That was a bit of a shocker, actually, from Neil Patel. He's a bit of a marketing guru. Well, that's a bit bad from him.
So you can have so again, there's a natural difference between cold emails and then all the inbound stuff like newsletters. So if you got an opt-in, right, you don't expect spam reports from your own audience. So like you can include more links essentially. But whenever it has to do with cold emailing, you literally try to remove everything you can. Because it's just very tough in the world of cold email.
Awesome, mate. Well, look, we have run a little bit over time, so thank you so much for your time. We'll let everybody get on with the rest of their days or finish their days, whatever it is. Thank you, Leon.
Yes.
See you, mate, and Nathan as well. Thank you guys so much. We'll make sure there's a replay of this, which will be on our YouTube channel. And we'll put some shorts out. There'll be information. So Frank will make sure that everybody can find their way to you at Salesforge, Salesforge.ai. So there'll be a link to that down below there. Go and check that out. I know that you have a one-pager little guide on there as well that people can download, like your quick guide to cold email too. So that's a great thing for people to go and grab as well off of you.
Yeah. Yeah, if you got any questions, guys, feel free to go on the website, ask any questions, find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm typically at. I'm less so on Facebook these days. So yeah, thanks for having me, and see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you, mate. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Cheers.